At a crowded Saturday farmers market in Austin, Texas, Ethan Calloway feels his world crack open when his ex-wife Brielle Maddox laughs at him loud enough for strangers to turn their heads. Phones lift into the air. People stare. His 3 6-year-old triplets stand beside him holding grocery bags that feel heavier than they should. In that moment, Ethan does not feel like a father. He feels small, alone, and exposed. The morning had started simple. Ethan only wanted fresh fruit that was on sale, and maybe a small treat for the kids if the price was right. He wore his oldest denim jacket because it was still cold, even though the sleeves were faded and the cuff was torn. The stroller he pushed had one wheel that made a soft squeak. He had fixed it twice already. It still worked. That was enough for him. Brielle stood near a flower stand, dressed in clean lines and bright colors that caught the sunlight. She looked polished and untouched by struggle. When her eyes landed on Ethan, surprise turned into a smile that did not hold kindness. She laughed as if she had just heard a joke, and then she made sure others heard it too. Her voice carried easily through the air, sharp and confident. She pointed lightly at his jacket, and then at the stroller, shaking her head as if he were something she had once owned but thrown away. The crowd reacted in quiet but clear ways. A few people whispered. Someone smirked. A teenager lifted a phone a little higher, pretending to check messages, while clearly recording. Ethan felt heat climb up his neck. He tried to focus on the apples stacked in front of him, but his hands trembled. He had full custody of the children after Brielle left 4 years ago, when the triplets were still learning how to speak full sentences. She said she was not ready for that life. Ethan had not been ready either, but he had stayed. Loneliness had followed him since the divorce papers were signed. Friends stopped inviting him out because he always had the kids. Family members offered help once or twice, then grew distant. At school events, he noticed how other parents formed groups, while he stood near the back holding 3 small backpacks and pretending not to care. He had learned to smile in public and break down in private. He believed he had failed somewhere, first as a husband, then as a provider. Even though he never left his children, he still carried quiet shame like it was proof of weakness. Mason stood closest to him now, holding the edge of his jacket. Rowan watched everything with wide, careful eyes. Sloane hugged a grocery bag to her chest like it was something fragile. They did not speak. They simply observed. Ethan wondered what they thought when they heard their mother laugh at him. He worried that maybe they felt embarrassed too. That fear hurt more than Brielle's voice. Brielle kept talking, adding small comments that sounded playful but were meant to cut deep. She spoke about upgrades and moving forward, about how some people get stuck. She did not need to say Ethan's name again. Everyone knew who she meant. Ethan swallowed hard. He considered walking away, but the fruit vendor had already handed him a receipt. His hands felt locked in place. For a second, he wished he could disappear between the stalls and never come back. Inside, however, something else was happening. The triplets were not shrinking the way he was. Mason's fingers tightened. Rowan's shoulders straightened. Sloane stepped half an inch closer to her brothers. They had seen him worried about bills. They had seen him sit at the kitchen table late at night with a calculator and quiet tears. But they had also seen him wake up early to pack lunches, shaped like hearts and stars. They had seen him clap the loudest at school plays. They had seen him stay. The tension in the air shifted slowly, almost too quiet to notice at first. A few people in the crowd began to look uncomfortable. Brielle's laughter sounded louder because no one else joined in. Ethan still stared down at the apples, wishing the moment would end. He felt Mason's small hand pull at him gently, not to hide, but to move. Then Mason stepped forward, just one small step that felt larger than the space itself. The movement was simple, but it drew eyes away from Brielle and toward the child. Rowan followed without hesitation. Sloane came last, placing herself slightly in front of Ethan's leg. The formation was natural, like they had practiced it without ever saying a word. Ethan finally looked up. He saw not embarrassment on their faces, but something steady and strong. The crowd noticed too. The phone that had been raised tilted downward, trying to catch a new angle. Brielle's smile paused for the first time, confused by the sudden change in energy. The children were no longer quiet witnesses. They were about to become something else. As Brielle keeps laughing, Mason tightens his grip on Ethan's hand, lifts his chin toward the crowd, and prepares to speak words that will make the entire market fall silent. Before anyone knew him as the father of brave triplets, Ethan Calloway was the man people slowly stopped calling. The silence did not happen all at once. It came in small ways after the divorce papers were signed. At first, friends told him they were sorry. They promised to check in. They said he was strong. But when Brielle Maddox packed her bags and left while the triplets were still toddlers, the phone calls slowly became fewer. Invitations stopped. Group chats went quiet. People chose comfort over complication, and Ethan's life looked complicated. He became the friend. Dee, who always had 3 crying babies in the background. He became the man who could never stay out late. Over time, he became the one no one remembered to include. The divorce had not been loud. There were no screaming matches in public. Brielle simply said she needed a different life. She said she felt trapped. She wanted freedom, travel, space to grow. Ethan had stood in the kitchen holding Sloane while Mason and Rowan played on the floor, and he had realized that her version of freedom did not include them. Within months, she moved out of state. Within a year, custody papers made it official. Ethan had full responsibility. Brielle had distance. Family members tried to help in the beginning, but even that support faded. His parents lived 2 hours away and had health problems of their own. Brielle's family made it clear they did not want to choose sides publicly, so they chose silence instead. Holidays became smaller. Birthdays became simpler. Ethan learned how quickly a house could feel empty, even when it was filled with children. Money became tight almost immediately. 3 toddlers meant daycare costs that felt impossible. Ethan worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, often late into the night after the kids were asleep. Some months he paid bills on the exact due date, praying no emergency would appear. He sold his newer car and bought an older one that needed repairs but cost less. He stopped buying new clothes for himself. Every dollar had a purpose, and that purpose was not him. Learning how to parent alone changed him. He had to understand hair braiding for Slane and bedtime fears for Mason. He had to learn that Rowan needed quiet when overwhelmed. There was no one to switch shifts with when exhaustion hit. No one to say, he would handle bath time tonight. Ethan became both comfort and discipline, both soft and firm. He made mistakes. He burned in, nerves. He forgot school forms once or twice, but he stayed. Even on days when he felt invisible, he stayed. Emotional isolation grew in places he did not expect. At school events, he noticed how mothers formed circles while he stood near the snack table holding 3 juice boxes. Sometimes he caught quiet whispers. Not cruel, but curious. Some people wondered why Brielle was never there. Others assumed Ethan had done something wrong. He felt their questions without hearing them clearly. He began arriving right on time and leaving quickly to avoid small talk. He told himself it did not matter, but deep down, it did. His biggest fear was not what strangers thought. It was what his children might feel. He worried they would think they were not enough for their mother to stay. He worried they would see him as the reason she left. On nights when the house was quiet, those thoughts felt heavy. He would sit at the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, asking himself if he could ever fill the space Brielle had created. But children notice more than adults think. Mason began standing closer to him in public, almost as if guarding him from something unseen. Rowan watched faces carefully, studying tone and body language with surprising maturity. Sloane developed a habit of touching Ethan's arm when she sensed he was sad, offering silent comfort without asking questions. They never spoke directly about abandonment, but their actions showed awareness. They understood that their father carried weight. Loneliness shaped Ethan into someone softer and stronger. At the same time, he stopped chasing approval from people who had already walked away. He focused on small routines that made the house feel steady. Friday night pancakes, Sunday morning park walks, handmade birthday decorations instead of expensive ones. He created traditions not because they were perfect, but because they were theirs. Slowly, he realized that even if the world had stepped back, his children were stepping closer. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. When Mason asked why some classmates had both parents at soccer practice. When Rowan stayed quiet after hearing another child talk about family vacations. When Sloane once asked if her mom would ever come back to live with them. Ethan answered gently each time, choosing honesty without bitterness. He refused to speak badly about Brielle. He wanted his children to grow up without hate in their hearts. That choice cost him pride, but it protected their peace. By the time the farmer's market incident happened, Ethan had already been carrying years of quiet rejection. What Brielle saw that morning was a tired man in an old jacket. What she failed to see was a father built by sacrifice, Strengthened by staying when others left, the world may have stopped calling him, but inside his small home, 3 voices called him Dad every single day, with trust and love. What Brielle didn't know was that the children she left behind had been watching everything, and they had already made a quiet decision about their father. Kids see more than adults think, and Ethan's triplets had seen every tear he tried to hide. Ethan believed he was careful. He thought he only cried late at night after the triplets were asleep, when the house was finally quiet and the world stopped asking things from him. He would sit at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, staring at bills and unfinished work emails. He would press his fingers against his eyes and breathe slowly, telling himself that tomorrow would be easier. What he did not know was that small feet sometimes stood at the end of the hallway, watching in silence. One night, Mason woke up thirsty and walked toward the kitchen. He saw his father sitting alone, shoulders shaking slightly. Mason did not fully understand adult pain, but he understood that his father was trying to stay strong. Instead of walking into the light, Mason stepped back into the dark and returned to bed without making a sound. The next morning, he hugged Ethan longer than usual before school. Ethan smiled, not realizing that the hug was not random. It was protection. Another afternoon, Rowan sat at the small desk in the living room coloring, while Ethan took a phone call near the window. It was a job interview he had been hoping for, one that promised steady income and less stress. Rowan listened carefully as Ethan's voice stayed polite and hopeful. Then came the pause, the polite thank you, the slow lowering of the phone. Rowan looked up and saw his father's jaw tighten. No yelling, no anger, just quiet disappointment. Rowan went back to coloring, but that evening he cleaned his plate without complaint and told his siblings they should not ask for extra snacks that week. Sloane noticed different things. She was drawn to emote, ions the way others were drawn to noise. One evening, after a long day, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed staring at nothing. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. Sloane walked into the room, climbed up beside him, and wrapped her small arms around his neck without asking what was wrong. She did not need details. She only needed to be close. Ethan held her tightly, surprised by how safe that simple hug made him feel. Over time, the triplets became quiet guardians of their father's heart. They did not talk openly about it at first, but their actions changed. At school, when another child once asked why their mom never came to pick them up, Mason answered calmly that their dad was always there because he chose to be. Rowan added that their dad never missed a school play. Sloane simply smiled and said they were lucky. Their teacher, Mrs. Calder, began to notice how mature they were for their age. She saw how they checked on each other and how they spoke about their father with pride instead of sadness. Small public acts of loyalty started becoming common. When Ethan arrived at school assemblies alone, the triplets would run to him first, holding his hands as if he were the most important person in the room. At birthday parties, they stayed close instead of wandering too far. They understood, without saying it, that their father sometimes felt like an outsider, so they made him the center of their small world. One evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch from exhaustion, the triplets sat on the floor whispering softly. Mason spoke about how people sometimes looked at their dad in a strange way. Rowan mentioned how he heard other parents talk about two-parent homes, like they were the only right way. Sloane said she did not like when Dad looked sad after certain phone calls. They did not blame their mother out loud. They did not speak with anger. Instead, they spoke with quiet determination. They agreed that if anyone ever tried to make their dad feel small, they would remind the world who he really was. The emotional shift inside them was clear. They did not see Ethan as weak because he cried. They saw him as safe because he stayed. They saw him wake up early, pack lunches, braid hair and fix broken toys. They saw him apologize when he made mistakes. They saw him choose them every single day. To them, strength was not loud. It was steady. By the time the farmer's market morning arrived, that silent plan had already formed deep in their hearts. They did not know exactly when they would need to act. They only knew that if the moment came, they would not stay quiet. When Brielle's laughter cut through the air and strangers began to stare, the triplets recognized the feeling instantly. It was the same tension they had sensed during late-night tears and rejected phone calls. It was the same pressure that had shaped their young understanding of loyalty. Back at the market, as Ethan stood frozen with shame rising inside him, Mason looked at Rowan. Rowan looked at Sloane. No words were needed. They had talked about this in whispers before, in their own simple way. Their father had stayed when others left. Now it was their turn to stay when he needed it most. The laughter echoed again, louder this time, and the crowd leaned in, waiting for the scene to grow more uncomfortable. Ethan's head lowered slightly, his confidence slipping. But the triplets were not children who would let silence win anymore. Back at the market, as Brielle's laughter echoes through the crowd, the triplets step forward together, no longer silent. In less than 10 seconds, 3 small voices reshaped the entire story. The laughter was still hanging in the air when Mason stepped forward, his small hand still holding on to Ethan's fingers. He did not look angry. He did not look scared. He looked steady. His voice was clear, not loud, but strong enough to carry. He said that their dad never left them, not even once. The simple sentence moved through the crowd like a sudden change in weather. People who had been smiling moments ago stopped. Rowan stepped beside his brother without hesitation. He spoke next, explaining that their dad showed up to every school event, every practice, every meeting. He said that even when other parents were too busy, their dad always made time. There was no blame in his tone. There was only truth. His words were not dramatic. They were honest, and that honesty felt heavier than Brielle's laughter ever had. Then Sloane, the smallest of the three, moved slightly in front of her brothers. She looked up at Brielle with calm eyes and said that their dad made them feel safe every single day. She said he stayed when things were hard. She said he never made them feel like a mistake. Her voice trembled just a little, but she did not step back. The crowd shifted. The energy changed so quickly that it almost felt visible. A few people who had been whispering earlier now looked down at the ground. Someone lowered their phone, then lifted it again, but this time the camera was not pointed at Ethan. It was pointed at the children. The teenager who had been recording zoomed in, capturing their faces instead of their father's worn jacket. Brielle's smile faded slowly. At first, she tried to keep her expression light, as if this were still a small joke. But the confidence that had filled her posture began to slip. She had expected silence. She had expected embarrassment. She had not expected loyalty. The words of her children landed harder than she imagined, because they did not sound coached or forced. They sounded real. Ethan stood frozen behind them, stunned. He had spent years believing he needed to protect his children from pain, not realizing they had been preparing to protect him too. Watching them stand there, small but unshaken, he felt something inside him break and rebuild at the same time. The shame he had been carrying moments earlier began to loosen its grip. In its place, pride slowly grew. The triplets did not move away from him. Instead, they formed a quiet shield in front of him. Mason stood straight. Rowan's shoulders were firm. Sloane reached back and held onto Ethan's leg, making sure he felt her presence. It was not a planned performance. It was a natural response built from years of watching their father choose them. A murmur moved through the crowd. This time, it was not mocking. It was thoughtful. An older woman near the fruit stand spoke up, her voice steady with age and experience. She said that any parent who stayed and raised 3 children alone deserved respect. She added that clothes and strollers did not measure love. A few heads nodded in agreement. Then, unexpectedly, someone began to clap. It was soft at first, almost uncertain, but another person joined, then another. The applause was not loud or wild. It was gentle, but it carried meaning. It signaled that the mood had turned. What began as public humiliation had become something else entirely. It had become recognition. Brielle's posture changed. She glanced around and realized the attention she once controlled was no longer hers. Her polished confidence looked fragile under the weight of her children's words. She tried to speak, but whatever she intended to say felt smaller now. The laughter that once filled the space had been replaced by something stronger: truth. Ethan finally stepped forward, placing his hands gently on the shoulders of his children. He did not speak much. He simply thanked them quietly and told them he was proud of them. His voice carried emotion, but not weakness. The crowd saw something clear in that moment. They saw a father who had stayed. They saw children who understood loyalty. They saw resilience without noise. The social mood had completely shifted. Where there had been smirks, there were now thoughtful expressions. Where there had been whispers, there was quiet respect. The phone that recorded earlier was still capturing the scene, but the story it would show had changed direction. It was no longer about a man being laughed at. It was about children defending the one person who never left them. Brielle looked embarrassed now, not because someone attacked her, but because the truth stood plainly in front of her. Status, appearance, and image had lost their power in the face of simple devotion. Ethan felt overwhelmed, not by shame this time, but by love. His children had just reminded the world who he was. For a brief moment, he thought the scene was ending. The tension seemed to settle. The crowd began to relax. He believed they could gather their groceries and walk away with dignity restored. But just when Ethan thinks the moment is over, someone from the crowd steps forward, and that person will change his life permanently. Sometimes family doesn't walk away. Sometimes it walks toward you. As the soft applause faded and the crowd began to settle, a woman stepped forward from near the honey stand. She had been standing there the whole time, watching quietly, not with judgment, but with attention. Her name was Naomi Alderidge, the owner of a small independent bookstore just 3 blocks from the market. She had seen the laughter, she had heard the children, and she had witnessed the shift. Naomi did not rush. She approached calmly, giving the moment the respect it deserved. Her posture was relaxed, her expression thoughtful rather than dramatic. She knelt slightly, so she could speak at the children's eye level first. She told them they had shown something rare that morning. She said loyalty like that was stronger than anything money could buy. Her voice was steady, warm, and clear enough for others nearby to hear. Then she looked at Ethan, not at his jacket or the stroller, but at his face. She told him that staying mattered. She said raising 3 children alone was not something to laugh at. It was something to honor. There was no pity in her tone, only dignity. The words landed gently, but they carried weight. Ethan felt his shoulders straighten without realizing it. Naomi reached into the canvas bag hanging from her arm and pulled out 3 thin children's books. She explained that she always carried extra copies from her store in case she met young readers. She handed one to Mason, one to Rowan, and one to Sloane. She told them they were gifts, not charity. Then she added that the bookstore cafe served the best hot chocolate in the neighborhood, and that she would like to treat them if they had time. The offer was simple, but it felt bigger than coffee and books. It felt like someone choosing to stand beside them instead of stepping away. Ethan hesitated at first. Years of handling everything alone had made him cautious. He was not used to kindness without conditions. But the children were already smiling, flipping through pages, their earlier tension slowly fading. Naomi did something else that mattered even more. She spoke clearly enough so the nearby crowd could hear her say that what those children did showed the kind of father Ethan was. She did not attack Brielle. She did not raise her voice. She simply validated what had already been shown. That public acknowledgement closed the gap humiliation had opened. Ethan thanked her, his voice quieter than he expected. He admitted that he was not used to strangers stepping in. Naomi responded with gentle honesty. She shared that she had once been married too. Her husband passed away suddenly 5 years earlier, leaving her alone with dreams they had built together. She said loneliness could grow heavy if no one interrupted it. That was why she believed in stepping forward when it mattered. The children warmed to her quickly. Mason asked about the bookstore. Rowan wanted to know if there were science books. Sloane asked if there were stories about brave girls. Naomi answered each question carefully, giving them her full attention. Ethan noticed how naturally she listened, how she did not rush their curiosity. It felt different from the way most people spoke to children. It felt respectful. As they walked together toward the bookstore cafe, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. It was not excitement exactly. It was relief. The morning had begun with exposure and shame. Now it was shifting toward connection. The triplets walked ahead with Naomi, still close enough to feel safe but confident enough to explore conversation. Ethan followed, watching the scene like it might disappear if he blinked. Inside the bookstore, the atmosphere was calm and warm. Wooden shelves lined the walls, and soft music played quietly in the background. Naomi prepared hot chocolate for the kids herself. She told Ethan that community events were held there every weekend, including a reading circle for children and single parents. She mentioned that the space was meant for people who sometimes felt left out of larger crowds. Ethan listened carefully. He admitted that showing up to new places had been hard since the divorce. Naomi did not push. She simply said the invitation was open. She believed that sometimes belonging begins with one small yes. The children, already flipping through their new books at a corner table, looked happier than they had all day. For the first time since the market incident, Ethan felt tea. His sharp edge of humiliation fade completely. In its place, Something steadier formed. He was not invisible in this room. He was seen. Not for what he lacked, but for what he had built through resilience and staying power. When they finally stepped back outside, the sun was lower in the sky. The world felt quieter. Ethan carried the grocery bags again, but they seemed lighter now. As they walked down the sidewalk together, he glanced back toward the market without thinking. As they leave the market area, Ethan notices Brielle watching from a distance. This time she is not laughing. For the first time in years, Ethan doesn't feel invisible. The following Saturday, Ethan stood outside Naomi Aldridge's bookstore with the triplets holding his hands. Unsure if he was ready to step inside as more than a customer, the sign on the window read, "Community Reading Circle, Families Welcome." He almost turned back once, old habits whispering that spaces like this were not built for someone like him. But Mason squeezed his hand. Rowan adjusted his collar like he was preparing him for something important, and Sloane smiled up at him with quiet confidence. Ethan opened the door. Naomi had arranged the chairs in a wide circle, not rows. No one would sit in the back. No one would feel hidden. She greeted every family personally, learning names, kneeling to speak to children at eye level. When she saw Ethan and the triplets, her smile carried recognition, not surprise. She had expected them. That small detail mattered more than she knew. The children joined the circle easily. Mason sat tall, holding his book from last week. Rowan scanned the shelves with interest. Sloane chose a seat close to Naomi, but still within reach of her father's knee. The room filled slowly with other parents and kids. Some came in pairs, some came alone, but the atmosphere felt open, not divided. No one stared at Ethan. No one whispered. He realized he was breathing easier than usual. When the reading began, Naomi invited the children to share thoughts about bravery. Mason spoke about staying when things are hard. Rowan talked about listening before speaking. Sloane said bravery sometimes looks quiet. Other parents nodded, not out of pity but respect. Ethan watched from his seat and felt something unfamiliar growing inside him. It was not pride alone. It was belonging. After the reading, families stayed for coffee and conversation. A father across the room asked Ethan about balancing work and parenting. A mother mentioned how impressed she was by the triplets' kindness. The talk felt natural, not forced. No one treated him like a broken story. He was simply another parent doing his best. Slowly, the weight he had carried for years began to lift. Naomi did not hover, but she remained close. She checked in without making it obvious. She asked Ethan how freelance work was going. She remembered details from their last conversation. She showed up the next weekend, and the weekend after that. Staying became her quiet pattern. Ethan noticed the consistency. It was different from the promises he once heard from others who slowly faded away. The triplets trusted her quickly. Mason asked if he could help stack chairs after events. Rowan started recommending new books for the science shelf. Sloane began drawing small pictures for Naomi's front counter. Their comfort was not loud or dramatic. It was steady. Ethan paid attention to that. Children, he had learned, sensed safety before adults did. Over time, Ethan found himself sharing pieces of his story. Not the painful details of the divorce, but the small struggles of single parenting. The exhaustion, the fear of not being enough. Naomi listened without interruption. She did not try to fix him. She simply stayed present. There was a soft warmth in their conversations, a subtle shift that hinted at something deeper, but it grew slowly and naturally. The focus remained on the children and the space they were building together. The bookstore became more than a shop. It became a place where found family began to take shape. Other single parents started attending regularly. Potluck dinners followed reading nights. Shared laughter replaced awkward silence. Ethan noticed that when he entered the room now, people waved. They expected him. He was no longer the man everyone left behind. He was someone chosen by a small but steady community. Then, one evening, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Brielle. It was brief and casual, asking how the kids were and mentioning she might visit Austin soon. The timing felt sharp. He wondered if she had seen something online or heard about the bookstore. He felt old confusion stir inside him. Part of him wanted to protect the fragile peace he had rebuilt. Another part feared reopening wounds. The children sensed his tension before he spoke about it. Mason stayed close that night. Rowan watched his father's expression carefully. Sloane asked if they were still going to the bookstore on Saturday. Their actions made their preference clear without words. They leaned toward stability, toward the place that felt safe. Ethan realized something important in that moment. Love was not about who shared your history. It was about who stayed present. Naomi had shown up consistently, without drama or competition. The bookstore circle had welcomed them without judgment. That sense of being chosen mattered more than old ties built only on memory. For the first time, Ethan felt like his life was not defined by who left. It was shaped by who remained. He began to see a future where his children would grow up knowing that family could be built, not just inherited. The shift from isolation to belonging did not happen overnight, but it was real. Just as that peace began to feel steady, another shift approached quietly from outside their circle. Then Brielle makes a public post online about the farmer's market incident, and it threatens everything Ethan is rebuilding. Brielle wanted attention, but she didn't expect the internet to choose sides. It started with a post late Sunday night. Brielle uploaded a short caption about running into her struggling ex at the farmer's market, adding a laughing emoji and a filtered photo that showed Ethan in the background with a stroller. She framed it like a light story about growth and moving on. She expected sympathy. She expected validation. What she did not expect was that someone else had already posted the full video. By Monday morning, the clip of Mason, Rowan, and Sloan standing in front of their father had begun circulating online. The video did not show fashion or status, it showed loyalty. It showed three small children calmly defending the man who raised them. Viewers across the city began sharing it with captions about real parenting and quiet strength. Comments flooded in, not attacking Brielle directly, but praising Ethan's steady presence. Ethan did not even know about the online storm until another parent at the bookstore mentioned it gently. Naomi showed him the video in her office, her expression careful. She did not look excited about the attention. She looked concerned about how it might affect the children. Ethan watched the clip with mixed emotions. Seeing himself through a screen felt strange. Seeing his children speak with such confidence filled him with pride and fear at the same time. Community support came quickly. Parents from the reading circle left encouraging comments. Some neighbors shared stories about seeing Ethan at school events for years. Even Mrs. Calder wrote about how devoted he was. The narrative shifted fast. Brielle's attempt to protect her image turned into a reminder of what truly mattered. Status looked shallow next to loyalty. Naomi did something quiet but powerful. She posted a simple message from the bookstore account about how real strength often shows up in everyday acts of staying. She did not name Brielle. She did not shame anyone. She simply affirmed what the EO already showed. That public stance meant more to Ethan than applause ever could. She was not chasing attention. She was protecting dignity. The triplets overheard whispers at school by midweek. Some kids mentioned seeing the video. Mason handled it calmly, saying they only told the truth. Rowan explained that families can look different but still be strong. Sloan reminded a classmate that laughing at someone is never kind. Their maturity surprised even their teacher. They did not seem embarrassed. They seemed steady. Ethan, however, felt uneasy. He worried that the online attention might create pressure for his children. He did not want their childhood shaped by viral moments. He sat them down one evening and explained that sometimes adults make mistakes online. He told them that what mattered was how they treated people in real life. The children listened carefully, nodding in understanding far beyond their years. By Thursday, a few parents who once kept distance approached Ethan at pickup time. They apologized quietly for assumptions they had made in the past. One father admitted he had believed rumors about the divorce without knowing the truth. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For years he had tried to prove himself. Now he realized he did not need to chase approval. Dignity mattered more than pride. Brielle reached out privately soon after. Her message sounded softer this time. She suggested meeting to talk about co-parenting and mentioned that the online attention had been overwhelming for her. Ethan read the words carefully. He sensed something beneath them. It felt less like regret and more like damage control. He thought about the years of silence, the missed birthdays, the distance. The children's actions made their feelings clear without confrontation. When Ethan mentioned that their mom might visit, Mason asked if the bookstore reading would stay. All happened that weekend. Rowan asked if Naomi would be there. Sloan said she liked when everyone sat in a circle because it felt equal. They were not rejecting their mother with anger. They were choosing stability with quiet certainty. Ethan began to understand something deeper. Real love was not loud. It did not show up only when cameras were present. It showed up in small rooms with folding chairs and hot chocolate. It showed up in hands held during hard moments. It stayed when attention faded. The online storm eventually slowed, but the lesson remained. Brielle valued image. The children valued presence. Ethan valued peace. He no longer felt the need to defend himself publicly. His life was being rebuilt on something stronger than approval. It was built on chosen loyalty. Just as calm began to settle again, a new tension approached his front door without warning. And when Brielle shows up unannounced at Ethan's home, the triplets make their final choice clear. Some people share your blood, others share your heart. The knock on the door came just after dinner on Thursday evening. Ethan was rinsing plates while the triplets finished their homework at the kitchen table. He did not expect visitors. When he opened the door and saw Brielle standing there with careful posture and a practiced calm expression, the air inside the house shifted. She looked polished, controlled, almost rehearsed. But this time, there was no crowd behind her, no cameras, just silence. She stepped inside slowly, glancing around the small living room as if measuring what had changed. Her tone was softer than it had been at the farmer's market. She spoke about wanting to reconnect, about misunderstanding, about how things online had become bigger than she planned. Her words sounded thoughtful, but something felt calculated beneath them. Ethan listened without interrupting. He had learned that calm boundaries carried more strength than raised voices. The triplets did not run to her. They did not react with anger either. Instead, they moved closer to their father without even looking at each other. Mason stood at Ethan's side. Rowan leaned slightly against his arm. Sloane wrapped her fingers around his hand. It was not dramatic. It was instinct. They were choosing their position without saying it out loud. Brielle noticed. Her eyes softened briefly, then tightened again as if she did not know how to respond to their quiet unity. She tried to speak directly to the children, asking how they had been, mentioning the video, explaining that adults sometimes make mistakes online. Mason answered respectfully. He said they were doing well. He said their dad had always made sure of that. His tone was polite but firm. There was no hesitation in his voice. Rowan did not argue or accuse. Instead, he mentioned the bookstore reading circle and how it had helped them meet new friends. Sloane added that they liked when people showed up every week. The message was clear, without being harsh. Consistency mattered. Presence mattered. Staying mattered. Ethan felt a wave of clarity settle over him. For years he had feared this moment. He thought he would feel anger or fear. Instead, he felt steady. He thanked Brielle for coming and acknowledged that she would always be their mother. But he also explained that stability came first now. The children needed routines, safe spaces, and people who followed through. His voice was calm, not defensive. He was not rejecting her. He was protecting what had been built. As if on cue, there was another soft knock at the door. Naomi stood outside holding a stack of flyers for the weekend reading event. She had no idea Brielle was inside. When Ethan opened the door, Naomi paused, reading the room quickly but respectfully. She did not step in immediately. She simply smiled and asked if it was still a good time to drop off the event details. The triplets' faces brightened in a way that spoke louder than words. Mason invited her in. Rowan pulled out an extra chair. Sloane ran to show her a drawing she had made for the bookstore. Naomi entered gently, greeting Brielle with polite kindness, not competition. She did not claim space. She simply stood where she was welcomed. In that moment, the difference between image and presence became impossible to ignore. Naomi had shown up without announcement, without drama, without cameras. She had stayed through small moments, through quiet growth, through steady rebuilding. Brielle, standing near the doorway, saw what consistency looked like. The room felt full, not crowded. Ethan looked around at his children, at Naomi, at the simple home he had worked so hard to keep steady. For the first time, he did not feel like the man everyone left behind. He felt chosen, not because, say, of viral videos or public support, but because the people in the room were there by decision, not obligation. Brielle's expression shifted again. She seemed to understand that control no longer belonged to her. The children were not waiting to be rescued. They were thriving. Mason talked confidently about school. Rowan described a science project. Sloane laughed freely while explaining her drawing. There was no emptiness in them. There was no bitterness. There was growth. After a few more careful words, Brielle stepped back toward the door. She said she would call to arrange proper visits. Ethan nodded, open to healthy boundaries but no longer desperate for approval. As she walked down the driveway, there was no laughter this time, no performance. Just quiet acceptance that the story had changed. Inside, the house felt lighter. Naomi stayed for tea. The children spread their books across the table. Ethan sat back and allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years: redemption. Not dramatic or loud, but real. The lonely single dad who once stood humiliated in public now sat surrounded by chosen family. Community had accepted him. His children were secure. He was no longer ashamed of his journey. He understood now that rejection had redirected him, not ruined him. Blood may begin a story, but loyalty finishes it. As the sun lowered outside and painted the sky in soft orange light, the triplets ran toward the yard where Naomi stood waiting to walk with them to the corner store for ice cream. Ethan watched them laugh freely, their steps confident and unafraid. And as Ethan watches his triplets run toward Naomi at sunset, he understands something Brielle never did. Sometimes losing someone is the only way to find the family that was waiting for you all along. If this story meant something to you, don't just scroll away from it. Share it with someone who need. It's a reminder that staying matters more than status, and choose to be part of a community that believes in real love and second chances. Stories like this grow stronger when people who understand them stand together. And now let me ask you something honest. If you were standing in that crowd at the market, would you have laughed, stayed silent, or stepped forward?